Okay, so HTMX, you go this side. Hope my performance will be better. I just dropped the frame rate from OBS to a lower rate. Basically, let's just directly go through the examples. And what is it? This HTMX summed up is just a library or framework. Actually, it's a very tiny one. And what it does is basically it's somewhat we are back to the web development as if it is 2010, something like 10 or 15 years ago. This was how we develop somewhat web applications. And what it does is you basically, for example, write some sort of HTML, and then there is this, you can see this HX targets blah blah or HX web kind of attributes, HTML attributes. And then once we interact with the form, HTMX dynamically replaces those portions of the page. In this particular example, it says whenever you click the button, this whatever button this is, click to edit, it will issue a get message to this URL. And as a response, then the URL, the query returns the following HTML as a response. And then suddenly your edit form, so your non-edit form turns into an edit form. And there's a demo here. So you can see there are just labels here, and as in here. So this is the current HTML form. And if you click to the edit button, and then suddenly magically it just turns into an edit form automatically. And then when you click submit, I suppose the submit button is documented here. Yeah, this one. It will issue and put an HTTP message with a put verb and targeting to this URL. And that will eventually, assuming you have some sort of database or server-side state, it will update that. So if you just make this 2, if I click submit, and then also we can see, this actually is simulates. It doesn't really hit the server for real. It just adds some sort of slowness timeout. So you can see what we did. Basically, we were at this state. We hit the get button, and then the server's response is something like that. And then, yeah, you can ask. This meeting is very informal, so don't worry about it. You can interrupt me or write from chat or from audio as well. Either way, it's fine for me. Whatever you're comfortable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, you definitely need. I have an opinion. This question is a good question. It's a great question actually. You'll definitely lead. And what happens is there are 2 recommended ways of using JavaScript with HTMX. One is the called hypertext. So it's some sort of a variant of JavaScript, which I will show. And its demos exist here that you could just introduce. So the thing is, if you just bring a plain JavaScript with script tags from server side, that's not going to work. Browsers won't execute that. Okay, but if you bring if you bring a regular JavaScript, for example, via attribute, and then if you inline this JavaScript, which is not CSP friendly, then the browser will execute that JavaScript. My favorite one is I'm not much favoring hypertext I'm favoring another one called Alpine JS, which I will show that as well. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yes. Yes, it is possible to use, and the next presentation will be integrating Fable into this. So yeah, no, don't be sorry. This is for you. So that also is a good question. This presentation is a little bit opinionated. I mean, it represents my opinion, and I feel for some cases using HTMX greatly simplifies your workflow, because you see there's no state here. You just send server-side HTML and just, I mean, you send some HTML, just get HTML, etc., form data, etc., and it's very easy to build applications. But at some portions, you will need far more dynamism, and whereas HTMX could be cumbersome. There, there's a way to put Fable into play, but it's not going to be React if you're a fan of it, because React by default, maybe it is possible, but it does not recognize the browser by. I mean, you can't just render a React tag and then tell the browser to pick it up. It's not going to work. So what we are going to use is web component technology. The web components are custom tags where browser recognize them natively, and Fable has a great support for them via Fable Lit. And the next presentation will be about integrating Fable Lit into this. Well, yes, I think yeah, they are both great, and I don't have any negative opinions about Solid.js. It's just Fable Lit is also just, it's an easy way to generate web components. And actually, Lit itself is a bit. I personally find Lit is a little bit less capable framework. I find it ugly, but when it is combined with Fable, in particular with Fable Elmish, then Lit becomes very good. So it's somewhat, I find it very complementary with Fable. Okay, so this is the basic essence of HTMX. There are multiple examples here. For example, there's some sort of sortable where, I mean, the demo is about this. So you just drag and drop, and then that's it. And all the code. Okay, is audio here still? Do you hear me? Okay. So for this thing, all you have to do is this code. And basically, you introduce some sort of JavaScript, and then it just not only you did this on client side, but also server state changes reflect to the client side changes also reflect to the server side. This may or may not be what you want. That's another story, because every time should I hit to the server? It's a question for you to answer. So as I stated, my opinion is, do the page let's forget about single page applications. Let's do plain old HTML multi-page applications. Then on top of that, you utilize HTMX to make it more dynamic. And then on top of that, there will be cases where you would really need some sort of pure client-side dynamism. There we'll add the Fable on top of the equation. And that will be, I think, pretty solid setup, in my opinion. Okay, what else we can say? There's inline validation. I'm looking for some sample with high. Maybe I should just look at their docs, because they show. But let's just see this example also. So basically, this says probably unless you write test. So let's say foo bar. So you see, the moment I just didn't write something valid, then it just complained. So how does that work? Initially, we have this form. So form has this hx post. Basically, it's meant to post this. And you can see hx target, which states that whatever happens here inside of this thing, whatever something emits, tries to send a message, for example, this post, only do it within the scope. And this HX swap means whenever a response comes, just replace this part. So including me, that means. This is not the default behavior. That's why HX swap. So actually internally, well, yes, I can't claim if you use pure HTMX, then yeah, you might not need a bundler. But if you need once you need Fable, then you might need a bundler. Or there is a new kid on the town called import maps. You can Google that out, and that's a neat way to bring your use your modules directly without JavaScript. Okay, so again, for example, there's a big drawback here. Every time this process happens, we have to hit the server side. So this may not be acceptable for some cases also. For performance reasons, or maybe you have an application where you want to work offline, etc. And the next thing we'll look at, someone is typing. John, could you please mute? John K. Yeah, thank you. So how does this work? So every time, no problem. We type something, I suppose. Then it will issue some an HTTP message via this contact email, and then so it explains already. It issues a post message, and then when the change event occurs and when that request occurs, it will replace this div thing. So how HTMX works is it just actually observes the mutation of the DOM tree via mutation observer, and then it just replaces. And it does this in two steps. One is it replaces the DOM, but doesn't touch some of the attributes. And then in the second pass, this is called the, I think, swap state. And in the second pass, it changes the attributes after a little while. This is called the settle state. Why does it do that? In particular for animations. So if you have because if you change directly the DOM, then the animations don't trigger. But if you do it in two steps, which is also explained. So I just want, if you're interested, it's better to go through this document. It's very nice, the reference, etc. It explains all this stuff actually very well. How does it work? And I was going to talk about the HTMX, the hypertext stuff. Yeah, I think it's explained here. So this thing has just, if you want to utilize JavaScript, well, for here you could just also write plain JavaScript. But the idea is that whenever this is swapped, you want some JavaScript to be executed. So there's something called hyperscript. It is a little bit this weird syntax, and then, for example, here it just issues a temporary message. Then you can use that hyperscript as well. It's the third-party library. It's not part of actually HTMX itself. And the one I recommend, so there's one caveat here with HTMX, which is understated. So if you're familiar with web components, a web component is, as I said, something like a custom tag, which I will talk more detail in the next presentation. It has something called shadow DOM. So a shadow DOM is something like an iframe, but it's not. So it's a very light version of iframe-ish kind of thing, where it prevents the CSS styles leak into the component or then going out either, which I will cover in the next video. But HTMX is not shadow DOM friendly, unfortunately. So if you have a web component, then if you decided to use web component, so HTMX within a web component, then it's not going to work. And HTMX itself won't work either. So to circumvent that problem, I have my own fork of HTMX. It's not merged. It remains as a pull request, but I don't think they will merge it. And it's actually the entire HTMX is one single JavaScript file. This is all about it. So you can, I'll paste the link if you're interested in. The difference is there are a couple of differences here with my version and the standard version. That my version supports Shadow DOM. And I think it has a little bit better form validation, which I will demonstrate in this video. The other framework I talked about is called Alpine.js. And this is, I think, this is also a very great complementary to HTMX itself. I don't know why this is so slow, probably the browser issue. Meanwhile, it's loading. Let's look at the Giraffe side. So for Giraffe, I assume you're familiar with that. The first thing you need to do to Giraffe is that so there's a template. You need to install this template for starters if you haven't done so. But the point, the unfortunate fact is that this template is not very well maintained. It's still on the .NET 5 era, but I'll just convert this into .NET 7. So let's look at the Alpine. Basically, with Alpine, you need to decorate an element with X data. Here, for example, it declared a state, something like open false. Then the button has an associated event, and when you click it, it just switches to open to true. And then this one says show this element if the open state is true. Is there a live demo for that here? I'm not sure, but basically there are a set of components, and this is very nice documentation. Yeah, I think, for example, let's look at this one. So we have X data, the count is 0, it's in quotes. Then it says that whenever I click this button, you can just increment the count, and then it just increments it. So this also plays very nicely with HTMX as well. Whenever you need some sort of dynamism, you need to read through. Unfortunately, I'm not going to cover in detail, but this is what I would recommend instead of HyperScript. And the second reason I recommend is this also has a capability to work with via Shadow DOM, and hypertext doesn't work if you need web components in the future. Okay, so far so good. Any questions so far about anything HTMX or Alpine, or any opinion? Okay, so basically, yeah, there's some person. Please write. Okay, all good. Yeah. So basically, what we covered so far, we talked about HTMX. We saw that it's some sort of library where it Ajaxifies your classical web application. And actually, just one last thing, there's something called boosting. So let's say you have developed a classical website, for example, ASP.NET MVC or kind of thing, and then you could just Ajaxify it by you decorating this thing, and then it describes. So this is like a progressive enhancement where you can gradually convert an existing application, a classical application, into HTMX. It Ajaxifies your application via sending an HTML. The advantages are, well, if you develop complicated React applications, in my opinion, it just becomes, at some point, state management becomes a nightmare. It becomes very difficult. So then, with this way, you don't have state management problem. You don't have memory leaks. You don't have performance issues you have to worry about. It mitigates a lot of problems. But also, in my opinion, you would need some sort of dynamism at some cases where HTMX has capabilities quite a bit. For example, you can even update irrelevant portions of the page, not necessarily the one that is triggered. So you can there's some sort of called out-of-band requests, and it talks about it somewhere, I don't know, but then you can just update multiple portions of the page simultaneously. Whereas that's not enough, then you need to fall back to HTMX or HyperScript or Alpine, and Where that doesn't cut, then I would recommend using something like Fable, in particular Fable Lit, which is web component friendly. Okay, so let's just move to the F# point of view of the things. Let's just so that I can start from scratch. Okay, let's terminate this one. Okay, so I'll just create a. So the first thing you have, if you haven't, so I assume you have .NET SDK, in particular 7. Once you have that, you just install this, which installs. In my case, it's already installed. Fable. Oh, okay. So what we are going to build. So also, I should just a little bit before moving on. I have some sort of personal project. While it doesn't look good, I'll just try to mimic it. So it's called something like Bin Drake, where it's a 3D beam packer. Okay, it's super slow. I think maybe next time I'll use Twitch. So what it does is you see there's some sort of, you enter item dimensions and it actually packs things in 3D. Okay. And whereas you enter these dimensions and then you can just add new item and then remove some items and then you calculate things and then it packs it. So I actually wrote this this entire thing in F# with the client side and the server side. And then we'll just try to build this table, which took me surprisingly quite a bit of time of me, especially in validation part. I was a little bit frustrated. So it's some sort of like a to-do list kind of thing. No, this is 3JS. So it's rotatable, zoomable. Yeah, anyway. So I'll close this. And then, so let me .NET new. Let's create a new Giraffe project. Giraffe.NET, sorry, new Giraffe -o. Let's say Giraffe HTMX, something like that. Okay. So the next thing I'll do is maybe at this point I'll just switch to the code. And as you see, this thing has just created a template. And unfortunately, as you see, they're just a little bit outdated. So the first thing I'll do is just I'll manually change this. We don't need an apply. That's an artifact. We don't need the Vim engine. And I'll just make this as a star, whatever latest version is. Then I go to terminal. I assume the zoom level is enough for you. Then what I will do is, if you remember last presentation, I'll just add packet because I like to work in packet. Okay, great. So .NET, what was it called? Install. No. .NET tool new manifest. No, .NET new tool manifest. Sometimes it's confusing. Okay, so what this does is it creates a manifest file here so that I can introduce .NET packet install, .NET tool install packet. Again, you don't have to do that if you're happy with NuGet, but this is somewhat standard. And you can refer to the previous video. I talked a lot in this. And the next thing I'll do is, once this is installed, I will packetize my project by doing .NET packet convert from NuGet. Okay, it's going well. So as you see, just like the last video course or presentation, we end up with a dependencies file. I'm surprised that it didn't bring the source to none. Not source, sorry, storage to none. Actually, this is not what I want. Yeah, I think, well, this wasn't what I want exactly because now the packages are here. So if this is what you want, that's fine. But I think the better approach is the storage none. I thought the default version would bring that. It's the packet init because, yeah, I forgot that. So let's just retry. Let the packet install. I think might get rid of this thing. So the difference between this is that if you do this, you just use your profile level NuGet folder. Whereas if you don't put it, then yeah, you see it's garbage collected. If it brings the packages to your solution or project folder. That's the difference between it. Whichever you want to prefer. And I think I did the things in the wrong order, whereas perhaps I should have started with the packet init. Then it would generate this dependencies file. Unfortunately, these tools are a little bit uncooked. I mean, this should have been the default. Okay, we are done, and .NET Run should start our Giraffe project. Let's hope it runs fairly fast. Okay, and it runs under, I suppose, this URL. I think I can click Option click here. Well, no, that opened it another browser, which I don't want that. Let's just localhost 5000. Yeah, so you can see this was what the default version of HTMX, sorry, Giraffe brings. And if you look at our code, what we have here, basically, Giraffe uses this kind of fableish syntax. Basically, we have an error handler, we have the core stuff, and we have this host. Actually, this is the starting point. In .NET 7, as far as I know, they again changed this to something called Web Host Builder or something like that. But I still like to stick to this one because I don't know, I feel a little bit more safe. And basically, there's nothing interesting here. It states that our default root folder is the web root here. So there's just main CSS here. And we have the actions, sorry, content root is same. And then we have this configure app here, configure service here, configure log here, and then it's default. So I'm not going to touch these much, I think a bit maybe. And there is this handlers. I have the assumption you are somewhat familiar with Giraffe, but if you're not, I would recommend you to go through the tutorial. But just very briefly, what I can tell you, perhaps a Giraffe is something like is a web framework that runs on top of ASP.NET Core. It's like a middleware actually. It's a middleware that intercepts. So it's like you can see it's here the service, not this one. Maybe this is the injection part, and the up part. Where was it? Configure apps. Yeah. So use Giraffe. It actually introduces a middleware. Basically, this says that if any URL is handled by Giraffe, then let it handle. Otherwise, it will fall back to ASP.NET Core middleware. So that will be the standard. So you can use mix match in both versions. And the whole thing about Giraffe is that it actually offers you a functional pipeline where you would just introduce some. For example, for this case, it says that if the request is get, then choose one of the paths where one of the routes. Let me just disable this. This is very annoying. Yeah, okay. So if you have a GET request and the URL matches the slash, then just return call this index with the world. Whereas if the root starts with hello, then capture the second part of the URL and pass it to the index handler. And we can verify that behavior. Again, I'm not going to talk deeply about hello honor, I suppose, something like that. So you can see the text has become honor. But I really, really like how Giraffe handles things. It's far, far better than what, in my opinion, what built-in ASP.NET does. As far as I'm not forced, I don't ever go back, even the minimal API. The reason is with the standard ASP.NET Core, there are a lot of magics, attributes, and I don't know, you have to memorize a lot of stuff. Whereas Giraffe, it just offers something more functionally composable, where you don't have to learn that much. It just sorry, the audio is cut. It will go through this pipeline. I'll give a 5 minutes break, and please stay tuned. I'll just come back for some small break. Okay, I'm backish. By the way, do you have any questions or anything you want to discuss so far about Giraffe? Okay. So, one of the things I like to do in Giraffe is, well, it's this part is, I mean, from this part on, it's very opinionated, I suppose, but you could do things the other ways as well. So normally, for example, well, I just write this kind of code. Maybe for this, maybe I'm lazy. Basically stating that if I compile against debug, then I get it from, I assume the environment is production, otherwise the environment is development. And there are multiple ways of doing this. You can get it from environment variables, or there's some sort of property stuff. But this is what I will do for now. And the thing is, we are not going to use this part at all, actually, because I mean this part in particular. So I personally favor HTML is eventually some sort of text, and while this offers you some more structure, programmers enjoy structured HTML. So because if you make a mistake, then you get a compilation error, and somewhat looks programmatically more easier to generate. Also, the drawback is because it sometimes becomes a little bit counterintuitive. In particular, for example, when you have a designer where the designer constantly supplies you with HTML, then every time you need to sync back with this syntax, and then it becomes counterproductive. By experience, I've been through this. So what we will do instead, we'll create a, let's just switch to the F# view. So we create a module where we generate the HTML via string way. Again, you may disagree. Some people don't like this, but this is something I like better. And I'll create a new module called view.fs. Okay. Okay, we're good. And so let's just call this module as view. And the next thing I'll do is I'll just introduce a little bit hack, something like that, which I'll explain why. If there's actually, you can even highlight HTML syntax via even they are in the string form. If you have this extension in VS Code, which is what was it called, F#. These are the installed ones. Yeah, highlight templates. So I only recommend, again, the creator of Fable is a super great guy. He created a template where you can see if you decorate any text with any function called HTML, then it could just make it something like that. So this already has a very great demonstration, and this makes it via, even with use Fable lit or use pure HTML on the server side, it makes it joyful to work with HTML and CSS in plain text form. Let me just save this file. So what this thing is, just as you see, it takes a string and returns it returns the same. It's just like an identity function, and it's not doing anything actually, but it will help us. The next thing is I'll just introduce a function called layout, whereas something like you can think of like it's an ASP.NET's layout pages. And so the scripting, which I will not do anything at this point. And the next thing I will do is I will just bring the write the HTML itself. Okay. So this layout thing. So you can see the moment I put this function, this was my function. This and my HTML code is magically syntax highlighted. Okay, just because I use this. So this is standard string interpolation of F# with triple quotes, and then this is just plain HTML. Yeah. So basically, this is just server, etc., etc. And well, let's just get rid of this part for the time being. And so you can see there are two places where it's just body and then the script. Our script is empty. We are not going to fill that at this point. And the body will be coming. And why do I have this? That maybe I want to make a decision based on the if I'm doing development mode or something like that. And the next thing I'll do is, well, while this is the layout, then perhaps maybe I'll create an index page. And then it will be like index layout, and then HTML again. And this will be also, well, for the time being, an empty string actually. Even because I don't have a body at this point. Oh, sorry. Complete. Just I even don't need this because it will be empty string for the time being. So I'll just close it. Okay. And then I'll pass this to layout. Yeah, something like this. Basically, I'm stating that hey, yeah. So whatever this is, it's actually a function this is not this layout. It's a different layout that I will pass from outside, which I will show, and it will accept a string. So basically, I will partially apply this thing from outside, and then pass this layout here. And all index does is it just introduces the new body here. Okay. And you can notice I included the three JavaScript files. Yeah, I'm not missing it. It's deliberate. The reason is this layout is not this layout. So this will be coming from outside, which I will show. I know it looks confusing, but this is a different. I mean, eventually it will refer to this one. So there are three JavaScript files here where you can introduce other JavaScript as well. The second one is just an extension to HTMX. HTMX itself has useful extensions. And this JSON says that whenever you want to post a message, by default, HTMX uses the form format. But this will make sure that it will use the JSON format, which is an option actually. And I also introduced the Alpine.js. So about this one, so one of the options is you can just copy this HTMX file into your folder, into this folder in particular, www root folder, or you could just also consume this as a URL as well, I think maybe. So let's just do the second part. So I'll create a file called HTMX.js, and then I will just go and copy my variant of it. Cancel changes. I'm not trying to make any change here. Let's just try to rename it. No, I just want. I'll just try to copy the raw format of it. Yeah, okay. Then here, save it. So I have my own personal edition code here, but it's not that much important for the time being. Okay, so once we are done with this, I think we can just go back to, at least for starters, we can also write our text just to see this works. Hello HTMX, something like that. Then the next thing we'll do is we'll revisit our program, and then we'll revisit our index actually. So I'll just come up with a different version of this handler, whereas if it is get, then just a sec. Yeah. Let's just get rid of these things. We don't need none of these. And then I'll come up with some sort of function like that. Then I'll just do something like this. And well, the layout itself. Yeah, I'm actually not even using the index. So let's just use the index itself. Just a sec. But perhaps I'm not going to use this at all. Let's not just use it at all. Let's forget about this. Yeah, it's a mistake. So let's go back and then let's just, yeah, something like this would be better. And this complains because of what? I should just move to parentheses. Okay, so I'm just passing the body as this one in this case. And this HTML string is a Giraffe function where it says that, hey, I have a plain uh, string. So I just render that one. Okay. So we are getting rid of all these mumbo jumbo. And you see this layout is not the one in the layout. It will still come from outside. Okay. We'll convert that. And where the magic happens is, yeah. So when we have this use Giraffe, yeah. Now it complains because this web app is requiring a layout. Then we do this, and then is let's just do something like this before. So let's declare views. So we have the layout function in the view module, and we pass this is dev or not from the environment. Then we get a newer layout, then we'll just use this version. Okay, sorry, layout. I think we are done, and I should just run this with .NET Watch so that every time I save, it doesn't have to, I don't have to restart. So basically, as a recap, what we've done is we introduce these things. Okay, basically, if it's in debug mode, then it will do this. Otherwise, it will do the development mode. Then secondly, we introduce this thing, this module in the view, which is a function where we don't use it. It takes an is development mode or not. Then also it takes the body or not, so body itself, and then it emits the body inside here. Okay, that's also fine. And then what we do next is we pass the isDev here from here, and we get a newer version of layout. Then we pass the layout to the web app, where what it does is if the URL is / it sends the body like this to the layout, and then it gets a string, then it will render that HTML. I hope it's not complicated. It requires multiple steps. And let's see if our trick has worked. Yeah, I think we're good. Now, the reason I recommend things this way is that you can now code things with plain plain string. Whereas, as I stated, let's just also see our HTMX has been loaded. I suppose that's also correct. So yeah, even the HTMX is also loaded. If you don't like this approach, there is something called Giraffe HTMX library as well. Maybe not everyone is fan of using strings. Maybe you want to have something a little bit more strongly typed version. Then you could just use this library where I'll just talk about briefly. It has two facilities. So one is that you see that you can generate HTMX via this syntax using hxget, etc. trigger. So it supports actually, I suppose, every feature of HTMX via this syntax. But also it has some sort of helpers which still we can use, that if the request is coming from HTMX or is it full page or partial page, so you can just use this library for this kind of things. I think this part is still useful for me, but I'm a little bit deviating from using the syntax. But again, it's entirely up to you. Okay, so we are good, but we didn't touch anything with respect to HTMX itself. Now we'll start coding against HTMX. So to do so, our goal was to create a table. So I'll just create a table module, maybe. Yeah. So let's just on top of the view, add fileable. Okay, module table. Then the next thing I do is I'll just bring my magical function here. And I'll just declare the column name. So I'll just build up my model here. Okay. And then basically, as you would remember, we have some sort of table, and this table has cells, and we were supposed to write numbers. And then, well, I declare my model for each cell is like that. So there's a name for each cell, and there's a well, optional decimal. The reason it's optional is that maybe the value is not valid, but this may or may not be what you want. So you could just model this differently. It's not so important. So we also have something called row data, where each row has its key, which associated with string, and each row has a cell of strings like length, width, height, weight, quantity. And I'm not sure I'm going to use this, but I think I will use this as well. So this is that in the last row, if you remember this thing. So let me just remind you how this works. In the very last row, there's an add button always, and the remove button doesn't exist. So every time I hit, you see that in the last row we keep this plus sign. Okay, so that just does that. It just maintains if this is the last row. Okay. So the next thing I'll do, I'll just introduce a function which renders a table. And that would be like this one. And basically, then inside of this, I will define another function called render row, which renders each row. Okay. And then the next thing I'll do is each row has some sort of key. That's how I planned. Basically, it's like a row identifier. And I will call this as a prefix. And then whenever I get a cell, I will render it as this one. Okay. So basically, if you look at this code, it says that whenever I get a cell, render a TD, just like a table cell, and I'm putting some sort of input declaration into that. It's like an input tag, but the input must be a decimal. It's required, and you can see the prefix is used here. So basically, if the prefix is foo, then it will be prefix foo. Then the cell name is the second part of the name. In the cell value, if it is option sum, then it will be the inner value. Otherwise, it will be an empty string. Yeah. Any questions? Am I going too fast, too slow? Anyway, yeah. Okay, great. So then we have an add button. So the trick is you can see that whenever you add a button, that we will hit to this URL via post request. I will explain this, so you just never mind for the time being. And then similarly, we'll have a remove button. So basically, we are building our HTMX code. What it will return from server, actually, piece by piece. And this somewhat moves the client-side complexity to server-side. And then you see that, for example, well, if there's only one row, then there's no need to render a remove button. Okay, but if there's more than one row, then yes, we need. And then that also issue with the a post request with the row key. Well, it just says well, it gets a substring, but I think this might be wrong. I'm not entirely sure why it starts from the first one. Yeah, I think yeah, that's okay. Keys, because the keys first prefix is just something like that. We'll visit that. And then once we have that, our cells will be what? Basically stating that for each row, so we call render cell, then we concatenate via, because these are strings, right? And this just generates a string where all cells are rendered, and then the buttons are like this. So if the row is not last row, then add both buttons. Otherwise, just add the remove button. Okay. And finally, our HTML will be this one. So we are just going to return this directly. So basically, for each row, remember we are trying to render a row. I think this should be one level out. Yeah, we'll implement. Yeah, that's correct because we haven't. So basically, for each row, we render the cells, we render the buttons. That's all. That will be all our HTML. Okay. And the next function will be the body, and the body will be something like this one. So we are done with this. Let's close this one. Okay. So what it does is, once we get the raw data, it will basically construct this object, okay, and then render the raw data. So basically, so this depends on the if the items are if the initial. So this is a list of rows. So if there's nothing to render, so there's no row, which is the initial case, then it will render one single empty row. Otherwise, if you have set of rows, then it will render all the rows by passing this to render function. And then it will again string concatenate. So basically, this body sees that all the TRs so far, all the rows that will generate it. Okay. And the next thing I'll just do is this one. And the last part is to combine everything else, which will be the final part of this render tables function. Okay. So this is the final part of everything. So basically, the render table returns a form where, well, this is just as I stated, when you post this form, it will create a JSON enc, and then this says that whatever button you trigger inside this thing, it should target this form. And then whatever server is returning, we want to re-render entire form tag. And this part is, it just makes it Alpine friendly. And this part states that whenever server returns an HTTP error, then alert, show it via alert. And this is the table's header. And then we render the body, which is here. So the body is rendered directly here. And we have a dummy submit button. So this thing will render the entire button, and then let's try to view this body. So this function is called render table, and I think we can just use this right now. So what we'll do is, instead of this hello world, we will call the table that render table. And well, this requires, and we'll pass what? An empty string for initials, for starters, right? I just need to just wrap this into another parenthesis. Okay. I think now we should be able to see a single row. We have a compilation error because of what? Why? Let me just. Oh, okay. I always forget this. Not so many times I did this mistake. I don't know. I think you're most likely right. Yeah, it looked a bit tedious, I admit. But again, it's also a little bit realistic. So this is also how you write a to-do app style application. Maybe you can just outsmart me and do it in a better way. But basically, you notice how we compose each part of the strings as just HTML. Well, of course, I haven't done the adjectivication part, where we need to, once we click the add or remove buttons, that's where the real magic happens. But that's not too long, hopefully. Let's go back to our example. Let's reload. Yeah, so all good. And the thing is, so if I click here, nothing happens, but it just, the form validation triggers, and that's where we are. So it just created one line, and the reason is we pass here in the program, it pushes an empty list, and then we inside our function we said that if the input is empty list, then we just return one row by default. And if we look at this thing, actually this add should have something like this. Okay, and then clicking it, okay, so if we fill this, then if we click, so you can see it's an error. It actually issued a post message, you see. So our HTMX is in action. It's just we haven't defined what's going to happen once we click that. So the next step is that we're going to define what's going to happen. To do so, remember our path is the table add row. Okay, so let's just bring that to Giraffe. But before bringing, so we need to let's just implement the functionality in the table module. What we are going to do when we click to the add row. The first of all, the thing is, maybe this is a little bit not necessary, but every time you submit, the entire form is being resubmitted. Okay, so that's how we programmed it. And to do so, we need a helper function. I just at least decided to use a helper function called getRow, which I will just copy and paste here. And it's a little bit cumbersome, actually. And I'll just talk about it. I also need another helper function. So I brought two functions. One is the number parts. This should come from the system. And what does it do? It just, if the string is parsable by string, it just returns a sum of this decimal. Otherwise, it will just return none. Whereas the second part is, while Giraffe offers them some sort of model binding facility, in this case, I will just parse it manually with JSON, incoming JSON. And then this just basically says that, well, I'll just parse the JSON, whatever is coming from the body. And then it just splits into this some sort of sequence. And basically it says that we can look at what kind of post is being done, actually, so that you can just visualize, I suppose, from the network tab. Okay, let's just get this body, what we are sending to the client. So we have this R1 is prefix, and then we are sending each of this value that like that. So why they are prefix, you can look at that because I code it this way. This R1 quantity, so this is the generated thing, okay? And what does this do is it just actually for each row, it just starts to loop through them, and basically this is a key value pair. So this one is like a R1 height, and this one is like the R1 height's value, and I convert them string. Then I use list, I just convert them list, and I group by them their prefix, because each row has the same prefix. So I just say that find the index until the underscore and then group by them. And then once you group by them, it just generates the row data by stating the key where it discovers here, and each row is just is parsed via this code. It basically extracts the name after the underscore, then it also captures the value and then sends the number parse and then says the value. And it says there is lost false. The smart part might be a little bit complicated, but actually what all it does is it parses this data that we sent and creates a raw data. So you can just do it in anywhere you like. It parses this one. Yeah. Yeah, sure. In this case, no, that's incorrect. Every time I press a button, I'm posting everything. Entire form goes away. Everything. And again, that's we could do the way you mentioned as well. That's also possible. But HTMX is a little bit more like a reconstructing the form, and this is a little bit dynamic form. I chose to do it this way. And why it does send the entire form? The reason is, if you look at the code, let's just review that. So you can see this HX target. It says this. So whenever you issue anything here, it actually assumes the target is me. Then it will send the entire thing actually. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it posts all the table, which is I did it deliberately actually. So once we have that, let's just introduce our add-row function and complete this part. And this requires Giraffe. Copy these parts actually. Open Giraffe, and then open Microsoft ASP.NET or HTTP. Yeah, okay. So what add-row does is we get the body. Okay, this is the HTTP body. We pass to the get row, and then we get this list of the row data. So this is like whatever parsed we have so far. Okay. Then from there, what I just say from its keys, I find the max number, which is like it's 5 or 6, but I find the next number. And the next thing I do is I actually append a new row here with the R being prefix, and then add 1 to the max key. Okay, it's very simple actually. I print this thing console. This is not for debugging purposes. And I re-render the table, and I return the final string. So okay, that's all about it. So we capture the body, we parse it, we get a list of raw data, then we get the maximum key among its keys, and then we add a new row, empty row, and you notice this is last is true this time, and then we just pass this raw data to get the string, and then we just use Giraffe's HTML string to render it. And the next, the final step is I'll just map this path here, which is easy to do so. Again, Giraffe offers you this subpath. So I'll just say anything that starts with table should go through this, and then anything goes through anything with this row then should go to here, and we are done for add row functionality. Okay, let's just move and reload. Okay, do I have compilation error? Yeah, it's not defined. Again, I forgot to save. Same problem. So funny. Yeah, let's retry. I think it's still compiling. Yes. Yeah, I think it's because the examples I've seen is for addition cases. It, for example, create a dummy invisible div, something like that. Then it just replace that one. I saw this kind of examples, but I'm not entirely sure. I can't say it is not possible. So perhaps better to see the documentation. On top of my head, I don't know the answer. Yeah. Yeah. So okay, we are good, and then we can click add, and then well, okay. So this is a problem. You may want to allow this or not, and because this happens if let's just see the working case first, and this happens due to my version of HTMX, and the standard one, because you see, standard one actually doesn't trigger these built-in HTML validation. And I think built-in HTML validation is a very, very good front-end validation. You don't have to spend an effort. I mean, I spend quite a lot of time when I do the validation via React. It's very frustrating for me. But if you disagree, don't do it. It's up to you. Basically, all these things has these required things. And whenever I hit add button, it actually also validates the form, which I can disable that. If I want, it is very easy. I go to this add button. I think. Yeah, see this HTMX validate. Again, by default, HTMX doesn't support it, and HTMX also requires you validate true or false. I just customize this a bit to make it more useful. So if I remove this, yes. Also, you could see the model is what the model posted here. So because I have this printf statement. It's still coming back. So now I can add things, okay? Without validation. And submit will still do the validation. Of course, client-side validation is not something you would want to rely on, you should always try to do it on server side, but that's another story. Our remove buttons don't work because we haven't implemented it and it complains. So as a very final step, and then our demo will be completed. There's no more code. Well, this has been a lengthy one. But this is the very last part. Yeah, so we go to table and then we introduce the delete row. Let's just put it here. So what it does is it again gets the request, then it finds the key. So it basically filters all the items where. So you see this the ID is here actually. This will come from the URL. We know it will come from the URL, and we are basically filtering all the rows which are if it's equal to that one, then it's just gone. And then we just re-render and we set the last to into the new last row to the new version, and then we render. And obviously I'll save this again. Okay, why does this complain? Oh, yeah, okay. And then we'll just add it to the program. And basically we already have the subroot, and all I have to do is to there's some sort of inconsistency in naming here where I call the URL the remove row and then the delete row, but yeah. So this I will come from the URL, and then we just issue it to this thing. And once we are done, our program is completed. My opinion about this is it's actually a little bit more complicated than I thought, to be honest. And then I did the Fable lit version of it, and that was even much faster. I was able to do the same thing easier with Fable lit, which I will demonstrate in next week. So you can see it, our demo works. We can add the remove, and then if I go to the last row, then nothing happened. The remove button is gone, and then that's actually pretty much it. I can share this to a repo. Maybe it's a good idea to share the code. And yeah, if you have any questions, now this is a good time about anything we covered. And otherwise, I will. Can I just publish here from like that? It's public repository. What? Well, source control. This is the initialize repository. And any questions? Oh, this naming thing. I hate this. Okay. I will post this thing, and I will share the URL, the video in YouTube as well as on the. I will share the URL under the YouTube as well as on the in the Meetup channel. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. It took a bit long, but take care. See you next week.